The buzz around Ellen DeGeneres' upcoming special episode was electric. Her producers had booked Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative star and outspoken commentator known for her unapologetic views on social issues, for a rare appearance on the show. It wasn't Ellen's usual guest. In fact, the entire production team was split. Some called it bold, others reckless. Backstage, Ellen rehearsed her lines. "We're not going to go easy on her," she said to her staff, half smiling. "If she thinks she can come on my stage and defend those archaic views, she's in for something." Meanwhile, Karoline arrived at the studio in a crisp blue suit, holding a stack of notes. Her team had warned her, Ellen's show wasn't just another talk segment. It was a battleground. But Karoline wasn't rattled. In fact, she welcomed the challenge. The moment Karoline walked into the green room, staffers exchanged nervous glances. Her reputation for sharp comebacks preceded her. One intern whispered, "Is she really going to debate LGBTQ rights here?" With Ellen, Karoline adjusted her blazer and looked into the mirror. "Let's make one thing clear," she said to herself. "I didn't come here to be polite. I came here to tell the truth." As the countdown to the live broadcast began, the atmosphere in the studio thickened with anticipation. Audience members filed into their seats. Many were fans of Ellen, used to her humor, warmth, and her fierce progressive stance. Karoline was walking into a lion's den. And she knew it. The producer gave the final cue. Lights dimmed, music rolled, and Ellen walked out to roaring applause. She greeted the audience with her usual charm before pausing and saying, "Today, we have a very different kind of guest. Some of you might not agree with her. Some of you might really not agree with her." And then, she said it. "Please welcome Karoline Leavitt." The applause was mixed. A few claps. Some awkward silence. A cough in the back row. Karoline stepped onto the stage, head held high, smile steady, but eyes sharp. Ellen leaned forward in her chair. "Karoline," she said smoothly, "thanks for being here. I have to admit, I didn't think you'd accept." Karoline replied, "I don't run from conversations that matter." The crowd shifted uneasily. Was this going to be a respectful exchange, or a clash of ideologies waiting to explode? Do you think Ellen should have even invited Karoline on her show? Or is open dialogue more powerful than echo chambers? Let us know in the comments. The air inside the studio thickened with silence as Karoline settled into the plush white armchair across from Ellen. Their smiles were polite, but their eyes sharpened. The audience sensed it. This wasn't going to be a light-hearted chat about pets or favorite movies. Ellen opened with her usual charm, but the tone quickly shifted. "So, Karoline," she began, lacing her fingers together, "you've been very vocal about your stance on LGBTQ rights. Let's just dive right in. Do you believe your positions reflect compassion, or just control?" The question sliced through the air like a knife. Karoline didn't blink. "I believe in truth. I believe in biology. And I believe in protecting the freedoms of all Americans, even when it means having difficult conversations." Ellen raised an eyebrow. Protecting freedoms, or rolling back progress? The crowd murmured, and for a moment, the studio lights seemed to intensify. But Karoline leaned in, her voice low but firm. "Ellen, you've spent your career celebrating your truth. I'm here doing the same, for millions of Americans who feel silenced in this cultural moment." Gasps echoed softly from the audience. Ellen chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Celebrating your truth? Is your truth denying people their identities?" Karoline fired back, "Is yours labeling every disagreement as hate?" That line landed hard. A woman in the front row visibly stiffened. A man a few rows back crossed his arms. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a mirror being held up to the nation's most contentious cultural war. Ellen smiled, but it was strained now. "Karoline, you sound like a politician. Are you here to connect, or to lecture?" Karoline didn't miss a beat. "I'm here because someone has to say what the rest are afraid to. Let's ask you, the viewer, is it possible to disagree on values without being labeled hateful? Or has that line already been erased in today's culture? Comment below, your voice matters. Ellen's tone shifted, her eyes narrowing slightly. You talk a lot about values. But where do empathy and lived experience fit into that? Karoline smiled, finally allowing her confidence to break into something resembling warmth. Empathy, Ellen, isn't exclusive to one side. I don't have to agree with you to respect your story. But respect is a two-way street, and lately, that street's been closed to anyone who thinks like me. The audience was silent again, not out of boredom, but out of tension. The kind of tension that made every word hang in the air like thunderclouds about to burst. And it was only the beginning. Ellen shifted in her seat, clearly feeling the shift in momentum. She was no stranger to verbal sparring, but Karoline's delivery was razor-sharp and unervingly composed. So let's get real, Ellen said, her voice carrying a sharper edge now. How can someone your age, barely into your 30s, speak with such finality about people's lives you've never lived? Their pain, their stories. Karoline tilted her head slightly. That's fair. I haven't lived every story. But neither have you. And when did life experience become the sole qualification for truth? A flicker of surprise flashed in Ellen's eyes. Karoline continued before the host could regain control. I've sat with families torn apart by policies disguised as progress. I've seen girls lose scholarships to boys in wigs. And I've watched the media call it empowerment while the people call it betrayal. A wave of gasps surged through the audience. Ellen's face remained neutral, but her knuckles tightened around the armrest. And by the way, Karoline added, leaning forward, age doesn't disqualify me. I represent a new generation, one tired of pretending that feelings trump facts. Ellen sat back, smiling coolly. You sound like you're campaigning, not conversing. Is that what this is? Karoline didn't hesitate. This is me not playing by your rules. Speech balloon, what do you think? Can someone speak up for a cause they haven't personally experienced? Or should we only stay in our lane? Comment below, your answer might surprise you. Ellen's eyebrows twitched, just enough to reveal the pressure mounting beneath the surface. You talk about facts, she said, mimicking air quotes. But aren't facts often just political interpretations in disguise? Do you ever consider that your truth hurts people? Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly. Truth isn't always comfortable. And it shouldn't be, but what hurts more is lying to people for applause. Her voice grew quieter, intentionally so. What's more cruel, disagreeing with someone, or letting them chase a lie until it breaks them? That line didn't land, it detonated. The audience murmured again, some nodding, others visibly unsettled. The division in the room had taken shape. Two Americas, face to face, seated on a studio stage. Karoline glanced at Ellen, her gaze steady. You've built a career on authenticity. I'm just asking for the same grace, for a different kind of truth. Ellen stared back, her smile faded for a beat. Then she reached for her mug of water, sipping without answering. The temperature had dropped, and the tension? It was electric. The air in the studio had turned almost cinematic, tangible, heavy, filled with anticipation. The typical light-hearted energy that followed Ellen like a shadow was replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. The cameras rolled, but the smiles had long since disappeared. Ellen placed her mug down slowly and looked at Karoline with a studied calm. Let me ask you this, she said, voice deliberately softened. Do you ever stop and wonder if you're on the wrong side of history? Karoline didn't flinch. Every day. And I ask myself something else too, what if history is being rewritten by those who shout the loudest, not those who think the deepest? That landed harder than expected. Even the cameraman blinked twice, unsure whether to zoom in or keep his distance. Karoline pressed forward. You call me rigid, closed-minded, dangerous, but is it really dangerous to ask questions? To protect women's spaces? To draw lines in a world that's erasing them faster than we can comprehend? She scanned the audience briefly. Speech balloon. Here's a question for you watching at home. Is it more harmful to offend someone with truth, or to protect their feelings with lies? Be honest, no filters. Ellen crossed her arms, lips pressed into a tight line. You think you're protecting women, but many in the LGBTQ community believe you're erasing them. Karoline nodded. I understand that. But can't we protect one group without dismantling another? Why does support for one identity require the silencing of another? A wave of silence. Ellen leaned in now, trying to regain the reins. You know what it is. You're strategic. You know how to wrap your message in careful language. It sounds polished, until you dig deeper. Karoline smiled tightly. Or maybe, it only sounds dangerous because no one said it on this stage before. Boom. That line cut through the room like a lightning strike. Several people in the audience glanced at each other, some stunned, others nodding slowly. A crew member behind the scenes whispered, "Did she just say that?" Karoline adjusted her mic. If a belief can't survive scrutiny, maybe it never deserved to stand. I don't hate anyone. I just love truth enough to say it out loud, even if it costs me applause. Speech balloon. Is free speech still free if it's only welcome when we all agree? Ellen looked momentarily disarmed, but not defeated. You're not afraid to be disliked, she said flatly. Karoline responded without blinking. Truth doesn't need to be liked. It just needs to be heard. And in that moment, for just a flicker of time, even Ellen didn't have a comeback. The room stayed frozen for a beat too long. Even the applause sign didn't blink, almost as if the studio lights themselves weren't sure how to react. Ellen leaned back in her chair, now visibly recalibrating. She wasn't just interviewing a guest anymore. She was facing a political insurgent who had no fear of Hollywood, cancel culture, or polite applause. So you're saying, Ellen began slowly, that the very movement meant to give people voices is silencing others? Karoline nodded. Yes. It started with compassion, but it evolved into compliance. If you don't repeat the slogans, if you don't use the right hashtags, you're automatically the enemy. That's not inclusion. That's conformity in disguise. A sharp murmur ran through the audience. One woman audibly gasped. Ellen wasn't done. You know what this sounds like? Deflection. You're cloaking intolerance in free speech. Karoline leaned in, her tone razor-sharp but composed. You just proved my point. When someone disagrees, we don't ask why. We just stamp them as intolerant. That ends dialogue before it begins. Speech balloon. To the viewers, do you feel heard in today's discourse? Or just warned not to speak? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Ellen's jaw tightened. She reached for her mug but didn't drink. I'm trying to understand, she said finally. But it feels like you're minimizing the struggles people in the LGBTQ community face every day. Karoline's voice softened just a touch. I acknowledge their pain. But pain doesn't give you the moral high ground to silence others. We all carry wounds. That's not an excuse to censor debate. A few heads in the audience nodded slowly. This wasn't the usual banter they'd come for. This was something heavier, realer. Ellen turned toward the audience, visibly trying to pivot. Well, at least we're having the conversation. But Karoline wasn't done. That's the issue, most people aren't allowed to have it. Not without consequences. You're Ellen DeGeneres. You have a massive platform. But how many other people out there are too scared to speak because they know one wrong word ends their career? That one hit hard. Ellen's face froze. Speech balloon. Honest question, are we building a more inclusive society, or just a more careful one? The audience sat silently. Even the studio walls seemed to be holding their breath. The tension now had a pulse of its own. Ellen gave a half smile, one of those smiles born not from humor, but from pressure. Karoline, she said, adjusting the sleeve of her blazer, you talk a lot about fear. But aren't you afraid too? Afraid of change? Karoline didn't flinch. I'm not afraid of change. I'm afraid of losing the ability to question it. A low murmur rolled through the audience like distant thunder. That sentence hit home. Some people looked at each other with widened eyes. Others folded their arms, unsure how to feel. The clarity in Karoline's voice was unsettling. It didn't ask for agreement, it demanded reflection. Ellen leaned forward again, eyebrows raised. So you think questioning LGBTQ rights is fair game on national television? Karoline raised a brow in return. You just twisted what I said. I didn't question rights, I questioned cultural enforcement. There's a difference. When did asking become attacking? The air between them crackled. For a moment, Ellen looked less like a host and more like someone watching their carefully set table get flipped over. Speech balloon. Let's talk, viewers. Have we made disagreement equivalent to hate? Is it possible to be critical without being cruel? Comment your take. Then came the shift. Ellen reached for a note card, something prepped in case things went too far off script. She glanced down, then paused. You've said controversial things about gender identity in the past. Don't you think that causes real harm to people trying to live authentically? Karoline's eyes didn't blink. Living authentically shouldn't require others to lie. If we can't be honest, even uncomfortably honest, then authenticity becomes another performance. The words weren't loud. But they rang louder than anything Ellen had said all day. One man in the audience stood up, clapped twice, then stopped, unsure if he was supposed to. The sound of his palms echoed awkwardly, like applause breaking in an empty church. Ellen swallowed. You came prepared. Karoline smiled faintly. I came honest. That's not always welcome, I know. The pause after her statement was almost spiritual. It wasn't silence, it was weight. The weight of a room where the rules had just changed, and no one knew whether to cheer or leave. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. Ellen's crew behind the cameras didn't give the usual hand signals. The audience sat like statues, caught in that uneasy limbo where something powerful just happened, but no one was sure if it was supposed to. Karoline took a slow breath, scanning the crowd. Do you know what's more dangerous than disagreement? She said, her voice steady, silencing it. Ellen blinked slowly, then leaned back. So you think we're silencing you, on a show I invited you onto? Karoline nodded. You invited me. But you didn't expect me to come with a spine. Oof. A few gasps scattered through the seats. One camera operator instinctively zoomed in. This wasn't just political sparring anymore. It was a duel of philosophies, and Karoline wasn't pulling her punches. Ellen tried to shift tone. Karoline, I don't silence people. I amplify voices. Karoline didn't even hesitate. No, Ellen. You amplify agreement. Now the studio truly froze. Ellen's fingers tapped nervously against her coffee mug. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Let's be honest. You're younger than me, and frankly, your politics are rooted in nostalgia. You want the old America back. That's what scares me. Karoline leaned forward slightly. I want an America where disagreement isn't called hate. Where asking questions doesn't get you cancelled. You call that nostalgia, I call it freedom. Speaking head viewers, what do you think? Is freedom of speech under threat when only one narrative is allowed? Drop your thoughts below. For the first time, Ellen didn't answer. Her silence wasn't tactical, it was reluctant. She was thinking. That alone spoke volumes. The audience began to stir again, some clapping gently, others still unsure. Karoline had tilted the atmosphere so sharply that even applause sounded like hesitation. Then Karoline added softly, you know, I didn't come here to win. I came to speak. That used to be enough. That line landed like a thud on the studio floor. Ellen finally looked up. You're not what I expected. Karoline smiled. Neither are you. But here we are. A mutual stare hung in the air. It wasn't warm. But it wasn't cold either. It was real. And that, perhaps, was the most shocking thing of all. As the cameras briefly cut to commercial, the tension didn't. Ellen stood up and paced just off stage, clearly rattled. Karoline remained seated, composed, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. The audience murmured quietly. No one had expected this to turn from a typical daytime talk show segment into a cultural lightning strike. One of Ellen's producers leaned in close to her. You want to pivot? Lighten the next segment? Ellen exhaled. No. She came here to talk, let her talk. When they were back live, Ellen returned to her seat with a forced smile. We've had quite the spirited exchange. But Karoline, I want to understand, what exactly do you feel you're standing up for? Karoline didn't flinch. For the generation you helped raise to be fearless, but only if they agreed with you. I'm standing up for the ones you told to speak their truth, unless that truth made you uncomfortable. The air thickened again. You could practically hear heartbeats echoing off the studio walls. Ellen replied carefully, I've always encouraged authenticity. Sure, Karoline said. But there's a difference between encouraging it and gatekeeping it. If someone's truth challenges yours, should it still be given a stage? Let us know in the comments, yes or no. Ellen chuckled, but it was dry. Do you think I'm gatekeeping you right now? Karoline held her gaze. I think you didn't expect me to be ready. Now that hit. Ellen's smile faltered. You think you're brave for coming on this show? Karoline leaned forward again. No. I think I'm lucky. Because bravery today? It's punished. On campuses, online, even on daytime TV. But right now, I get to speak. And that, despite everything, is still rare. Some in the crowd started clapping again, louder this time. The mood had shifted. Even those who disagreed couldn't deny the nerve Karoline had struck. It wasn't about agreeing anymore, it was about guts. Ellen tried one last angle. Do you think you're changing minds here? Karoline shook her head. I'm not here to change minds. I'm here to remind them they still have one. Boom. The studio was still lit for television, but it suddenly felt like a stage for something much deeper than entertainment. For a brief second, Ellen looked almost moved. Like somewhere inside, she respected the chaos Karoline had walked into. Maybe even envied it. And Karoline? She just sat there, like someone who had said what she came to say, and didn't care who clapped. As the segment ended and the studio lights dimmed, Ellen leaned back in her chair, forcing a grin as the outro music played. Give it up for Karoline Leavitt, everyone, she said, her voice calm but tinged with tension. The audience clapped, some enthusiastic, some hesitant. Backstage, chaos brewed. Producers huddled, social media managers scrambled to draft damage control statements, and Ellen's phone vibrated with messages from agents, executives, and celebrities, many expressing outrage, others silently impressed by the storm Karoline had stirred up. Karoline was escorted off the stage by a crew member, who whispered, I've never seen Ellen that shaken. Not in years. Karoline smirked. Maybe it's about time someone reminded her she's not untouchable. Do you think free speech still truly exists in Hollywood? Or is it only free when it agrees with the narrative? Drop your thoughts below. Meanwhile, Ellen retreated to her dressing room. She stared into her mirror, uncharacteristically silent. Her reflection didn't show the daytime queen of smiles and laughs, it showed a woman who just had her worldview cracked in front of millions. Back at her hotel, Karoline was already trending. Clips from the segment were being posted faster than she could refresh her feed. One tweet read, Karoline Leavitt just dismantled Ellen DeGeneres on her own turf. That's not politics, that's a power shift. Another. Say what you want about Karoline, but she's got steel in her spine. This wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning. But not all responses were kind. Hate poured in just as quickly. She doesn't belong on our screens. She hijacked the platform for hate. She should be banned from daytime television forever. Karoline scrolled calmly. She had expected this. The same freedom that let her speak was the same freedom that let them rage. But she wasn't fazed. Because somewhere amid the noise, a direct message came in. From someone who worked at a major network. You flipped the room. Let's talk. Was this the beginning of something bigger? Karoline didn't smile. She just locked her phone, looked in the mirror, and said, "This isn't about fame. It's about fire. And it's only getting started." The storm hadn't passed. It had just found its lightning rod. The next morning, the headlines weren't about the latest celebrity divorce, a royal scandal, or another DC policy flop. They were about Karoline Leavitt versus Ellen DeGeneres. Ellen mocked her views, Karoline set the studio on fire. The conservative who faced Hollywood and didn't blink. Is this the beginning of a cultural reversal? Even Karoline's critics were forced to admit, something seismic had shifted. And Ellen? Her team released a statement by noon, calling the segment a conversation that got unexpectedly passionate. But viewers weren't buying the soft PR cleanup. Clips of Karoline's reply, calm, clear, brutal, circulated across TikTok and X like wildfire. One particular moment went viral, her final line before the credits rolled. "It's not hate to disagree. It's cowardice to silence." That line had hit a nerve. And it echoed louder than anyone expected. Have we forgotten how to have civil disagreements? Or is the real fear that some voices are finally being heard too clearly? Let us know in the comments. Back at her home office, Karoline sat alone, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the whirlwind unfold. Her inbox was overflowing, media requests, hate mail, praise, threats, even invitations to speak at universities and major events. She didn't feel victorious. She felt necessary. Meanwhile, Ellen remained silent. No new tweets. No posts. For the first time in years, the daytime queen was offbeat. Off balance. Karoline's phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another opportunity. Another storm on the way. She looked into the camera of her laptop, prepping for yet another interview, and whispered to herself. You can cancel a show. You can't cancel truth. And just like that, the studio lights dimmed, but the conversation didn't. Karoline didn't just answer a question, she sparked a cultural moment. In a world where shouting has replaced listening, and labels are handed out faster than facts, one exchange reminded millions that courage doesn't always look like what Hollywood sells. Whether you agree with Karoline or not, her words hit hard for a reason, because they came from conviction, not a script. Speaking head, now it's your turn. Do you think Karoline was out of line, or did she say what others were too afraid to? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this made you pause and think. Until next time. Stay bold, stay curious, and never be afraid to speak your truth.